From finishing 12th in the Premier League to lifting the Club World Cup trophy alongside the US president, Chelsea's transformation hasn't just been unexpected, it's been unbelievable. A club once mocked as football's most expensive disaster is now lifting silverware again. Not long ago, Chelsea weren't feared. They were laughed at. £1 billion spent, and they still couldn't name a consistent starting 11. But slowly, the chaos began to take shape. And against all odds, the punchline became a problem. This is the story of how Chelsea hit rock bottom and turned it into something worth believing in again. The fall didn't begin with a defeat on the pitch. It began with a geopolitical crisis. In early 2022, Roman Abramovich, the man who had turned Chelsea into a European powerhouse, was forced to sell the club after being sanctioned by the UK government for his alleged ties to the Russian regime during the Ukraine invasion. Just like that, 2 decades of ruthlessly efficient ownership came to a sudden, messy end. Chelsea were no longer a football empire. They were an asset up for grabs. Enter Todd Boehly, an American billionaire with stakes in the LA Dodgers and Lakers. Boehly wasn't just new to Chelsea, he was new to football. But he didn't walk in quietly. He walked in with something to prove. Because from day one, he felt it. The whispers, the glances, the loyalty that still lingered for Roman. Boehly was supposed to be the future, but all anyone seemed to talk about was the past. No matter what he did, he wasn't Abramovich. He didn't have the trophies, the ruthless aura, the fear. Fans didn't embrace him, and that stung. So Boehly responded, not with patience, but with ego. He wanted to show that he could do it his way. Bigger, bolder, better. Not just maintain the legacy, surpass it. He didn't hire a sporting director, he became one. He didn't trust the process. He was the process. And when he fired Thomas Tuchel, the Champions League winning manager beloved by fans, he wasn't just making a football decision, he was making a statement. This is my club now. Then came the spending spree. Over 20 new players in 2 transfer windows, almost enough to fill 2 starting 11s. It wasn't strategic, it was expressive, as if every signing, every big fee, was another way of screaming into the void, I belong here too. But the result? Chaos. A bloated squad, no chemistry, players changing in the hallways because the dressing room was full. A whiteboard needed just to organize training groups. Aubameyang, Joao Felix, Mudryk, Fofana, Enzo, big names, big wages, no idea how they fit together. Chelsea didn't have a squad, they had a spreadsheet. And nobody, not even Boehly, could make sense of it. Meanwhile, he kept trying to inject American thinking into English football. In a now infamous moment, he proposed a Premier League All-Star game, a comment that drew laughs across Europe and a cold clapback from Jurgen Klopp.
Great. When he finds a date for that, he can call me.
To many, it confirmed what they feared. Boehly wasn't building a football club. He was treating it like a startup, like Hollywood. But football isn't Netflix, and Stamford Bridge isn't a soundstage. In less than a year, Chelsea went from Champions League contenders to Premier League punchline. The empire Roman Abramovich built had become a revolving door of managers, players, and ideas that didn't stick. And at the center of it all was a billionaire with no map, desperate to be seen. A man fighting ghosts, trying to escape Roman's shadow while proving he could cast one of his own. By the end of Boehly's first season, Chelsea weren't just underperforming, they were unraveling from the inside. 4 managers in 1 year, a 12th place finish, 38 goals, in 38 games. But the real damage wasn't just on the pitch, it was behind closed doors. Graham Potter, hailed as the long-term visionary who would bring structure and stability, walked into a dressing room that didn't believe in him, and maybe, deep down, never respected him. Some players, accustomed to world-class managers and high-pressure environments, reportedly found Potter too soft-spoken, too unsure, more like a university professor than the leader of a multi-billion-pound football machine. His calm demeanor, once considered his greatest strength, began to look like passivity. The result? Players tuned out, the dressing room splintered, and as losses piled up, Potter became an easy scapegoat. There were whispers that he was in over his head, that senior players had stopped listening, and that the squad had already moved on mentally before the board officially did. But Potter wasn't the only one out of his depth. Todd Boehly, still learning the sport on the fly, wasn't content to sit in the stands. After losses, he reportedly began entering the dressing room, delivering speeches, in one case calling the team's performance embarrassing directly to the players. For some, it may have been intended as motivation. But for a dressing room already stretched thin by tactical confusion and internal politics, it felt like overreach. In European football, there's an unspoken code. The dressing room belongs to the manager and the players. When the owner crosses that line, the message is clear: no one's in control. Chelsea, once a fortress of discipline and ruthlessness, had become a power vacuum, bloated with talent, starved of leadership. And at that point, it was hard to argue. When the dust finally settled on Chelsea's disastrous season, something quietly shifted, not on the pitch, but behind the scenes. Todd Boehly, after months of chaos and criticism, finally stepped back from football operations, handing control to real sporting directors like Paul Winstanley, Lawrence Stewart, and Joe Shields. For the first time since the takeover, there was structure. The spending didn't stop, but now it had purpose. Targeted, high-upside talent on long-term deals. And no signing captured that shift more clearly than Cole Palmer. Signed late in the summer window from Manchester City, Palmer wasn't the type of name Chelsea had chased before. He wasn't a headline act, he was a football decision. But it turned out to be the perfect match. Chelsea were crying out for a talisman, someone fearless, decisive, and composed enough to lead a young, hungry squad trying to rediscover itself. Palmer, meanwhile, was itching to step out of the shadows. At City, he'd been surrounded by stars, but rarely trusted with the spotlight. He wasn't just proving himself to the Premier League, he was sending a message to Pep Guardiola, the coach that refused to play him, and to every fan who underestimated him. And he delivered. He didn't just fit into the system, he became the system. A player who turned a lost squad into a team with purpose. But he wasn't alone. Moises Caicedo, another headline signing from Brighton, took time to settle, but eventually anchored the midfield with tenacity, energy, and tactical discipline. With Enzo Fernandez beside him, Chelsea began forming a real engine room, something they sorely lacked during the turbulent months prior. At the back, Trevoh Chalobah and Levi Colwill stepped up, showing maturity, grit, and composure beyond their years, forming the spine of a defense built on trust, not just price tags. Up front, Nicholas Jackson brought relentless running and raw talent, while Pedro Neto offered pace, flair, and unpredictability on the flanks. And suddenly, this wasn't a bloated mess. It was a blueprint. The excess was trimmed. Training became more structured. Roles became clearer. And for the first time in over a year, Chelsea weren't just buying names, they were building a team. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was direction. And after a season of chaos, that alone was a massive win. Chelsea's revival didn't begin with tactics. It began with trust. After a season defined by chaos, cliques, and confusion, What the club needed most wasn't another superstar or a tactical guru. It needed a leader who could rebuild the dressing room from the inside out. That's exactly what they found in Enzo Maresca. Fresh off a promotion campaign with Leicester City, Maresca wasn't hired because of trophies or charisma. He was hired because he knew how to build a team. At Leicester, he didn't just win, he created identity. A group of players who believed in their roles, believed in the system, and most importantly, believed in each other. And Chelsea needed that desperately. He brought something that had been missing for far too long at Stamford Bridge: emotional intelligence. He didn't walk in trying to overpower the squad. He listened first. He didn't demand instant success, he built toward it. He simplified expectations, calmed the noise, and turned a room full of individuals into a group pulling in the same direction. Under Maresca, there were no favorites, no divisions. Just one collective mission: to restore pride in the badge. That shift was visible, not just in results, but in energy. Celebrations became more unified, body language more connected. The belief wasn't just tactical, it was emotional. This was no longer a squad weighed down by pressure and confusion. It was a team growing together, week by week. Chelsea weren't just improving, they were becoming whole again. The trophies didn't silence the doubters, the journey did. Because when Chelsea lifted the Conference League trophy, it wasn't just about silverware. It was about the scars, the memes, the mockery. It was about every player who had been written off, every fan who sat through the chaos, every headline that called Chelsea a failure. And then came the moment no one expected. Club World Cup champions. A team that had finished 12th just a season before, now standing on top of the world. Not because they got lucky, but because they finally came together. This was a squad forged through failure. They didn't dominate every match. They struggled, they scraped. And in the moments where they seemed to stray, when old doubts crept back in, Cole Palmer was the one who pulled them back. Calm, under pressure, clinical in front of goal. Time and time again, he dragged Chelsea forward, not with drama, but with presence. He wasn't just a top scorer, he was a compass, pointing the way every time the team lost its bearings. But this wasn't just his story, it was everyone's. The young players who grew into leaders, the fans who stuck around when it was easier to turn away, the club that was once ridiculed for spending blindly, now praised for believing in a long-term vision. The dressing room was no longer a revolving door. It was a unit, a family. That's why this redemption mattered more. It wasn't just a return to winning, it was a return to meaning, to identity, to pride. Not because Chelsea became perfect, but because finally they became a team worth believing in again. So what is Chelsea now? Not the cold, ruthless machine they were under Abramovich, not the chaotic billion-pound puzzle they became under Boehly, and not some fairy tale underdog story either. This version of Chelsea is something else entirely: raw, resilient, real. A team built not on legacy, but on lessons. A club that rebuilt itself through failure, criticism, and reflection. They didn't just change players, they changed their mindset. With a young, hungry squad and a coach who brings calm instead of chaos, Chelsea finally looked like a team with direction again. They may never be what they once were, but maybe that's the point. Because what they've become might be even more dangerous. Not a club clinging to its past, but one brave enough to build its future. And just like the lion on their crest, they now lurk in the shadows, quiet, focused, waiting for the right moment to strike, aiming to knock down the Premier League's giants, Liverpool, City, Arsenal, and reclaim the throne as king of the jungle. The Premier League title isn't just a dream, it's the next hunt. And if this is only the beginning, the rest of the league better be ready.